Hey everyone, just going to wait a little while to see who files in, if anyone files in. Oh, there's people filing in. Look at them filing. For those of you who have never done the live stream from my end, then there's this little set of faces that show up in the corner and tell me how many people are coming in the room or who are in the room. So wait just a little while. This is the wrap-up lecture. Hey, Tanj. This is the wrap-up lecture for the end of a semester of a course at MacEwan University called Topics in Children's Literature. We have a number of topics courses at MacEwan, and the topics courses are a way for us to give some agency to our professors to teach different subjects within within a subject. So topics in children's literature, looking at the Wizard of Oz and how it changes over the course of an entire semester. Hello to everyone. So many hellos. Kit, Cairo, Catherine, AJ, Bryn, Julie. And when I pitched this originally, I thought of it as a course, topics in children's literature. But I think if I taught it again, I think I would change what I was doing with it to topics in gender and race. Actually, I think we there's enough in what Berger talks about in here that she comes back around to gender and race many times, and I begun to wonder if that might not have been a more profitable approach. I don't know, but I think as a course on children's literature, we really only looked at one children's book, one ostensibly children's family movie, and then the rest of it tended towards more adult themes and ideas. So I think if I do this again, and I might, I don't know, I would change which course I would submit it for, which topics course I would submit it for. But it's just a little thing for those of you who are out there who watch this video who don't go to MacEwan University, and if you're wondering, would MacEwan University be a good place for me? Would I like their English department? Well, we have topics courses, and what's great about those is that someone can take, say, children's topics in children's literature more than once, and because the content's going to be different from prof to prof. Hey, Nisha. All right, so the last chapter in Alyssa Berger's The Wizard of Oz's American Myth is titled Magic and Witchcraft. And even though many of you have already handed in your paper, or you're finishing up your paper, you've decided on what you're writing, and there may not be a lot that I can give you from this for that, I still wanted to talk about this last chapter because I think it's one of Berger's strongest. The things that Berger does in this book well, she's really doubling down on in this chapter. I think the Magic and Witchcraft chapter is one of the strongest in the book. And one of the moves that I think are really strong for her is when she does that splitting of the idea, some form of dichotomy. And here she's working with deviance and empowerment and talking about how magic is the discourse surrounding magic in America, and I think we could broadly say North America. I don't think this is just America that thinks this way, because there's a perpetuation of these the way in which she's talking about magic and witchcraft, and I think it's really important to keep in mind that she's largely, although she digresses from this a little bit, she's largely talking about magic in fictional texts. This is not a discussion about magic and witchcraft largely in the real world, although she does make a few historical references as foundation for the argument she wants to make, involving this idea of deviance and empowerment. These two, as she puts it, distinct and contradictory discourses, right? It's two distinct and contradictory discourses. And she cites a bunch of different works as evidence of the abounding representations of magic and witchcraft in contemporary literature, film, and television. She talks about Harry Potter series, and obviously the films, television series such as Bewitched, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and she's talking about an earlier instance of Sabrina the Teenage Witch, but the really recent Netflix version of Sabrina would really come into conversation with what Berger's talking about in this chapter, because that series explores both the side of these two distinct and contradictory discourses. It's an investigation of that idea of deviance and empowerment all in one, through like and not. It's similar in ways to what she talks about in this chapter with regards to Maguire's Wicked and the Broadway Wicked. But it's a very rich and interesting approach to allowing the discourse of deviance to remain while still working with that one of empowerment. And there are lots of texts that work with both, but I think Sabrina, the new version of Sabrina, would be a very interesting study of this. So, again, if you're looking, I don't know why I say it again, but I've been saying in these final lectures is things that I can recommend to my students to, keep the mental fires burning, is to look for popular instances where you can continue to consider Linda Hutchins' theory of adaptation, but also some of the things that Berger has talked about in this book. And I think Sabrina, the new Sabrina on Netflix, would be a great way to approach that. But this idea, these two distinct and contradictory discourses of deviance and empowerment. She says, in the first of these, magical ability is viewed as dangerous and monstrous, an unnatural power to be destroyed. In conjunction with this approach to witchcraft as threat to the social order is the belief that such power should be domesticated, brought under forcible control if it cannot be utterly eliminated. And she speaks to that discourse through a reaching back to the history of the witchcraft trials of Salem, Massachusetts, and speaks to the idea that these witches, the people who were tried, there was, that they were deviant, they were outside the norm. She also speaks to empowerment through that as well, as a way of demonstrating this discourse, this conversation, as something that is uniquely American. And again, I'm not really sure, we've talked about this all semester, I'm not really sure that particular argument holds as strongly as Berger might hope. But her ideas about deviance and empowerment, I think, are really great set of terms to talk about magic and witchcraft, not only in The Wizard of Oz, but in a number of other texts as well. And that's some of what I wanted to do today as well, is to explode the course. There's a concept in some games where you have what are called exploding dice. And if you roll a certain result, you get to roll again, or you get to roll some more. And it just it's a perpetuating of that. And I like to think of the ideas in a course as exploding dice, that we come to the end of the semester and there's a conclusion of sorts, but there's a new beginning as we walk out and we have all these ideas running around in our heads. And now we're applying them to other things. Like it was never my intention to just have this course be, let's learn about The Wizard of Oz, and that's it. I wanted you to learn a little bit about adaptation theory. I wanted you to look at a comparative study that looks at the difference a difference can make, so that the next time that you encounter an adaptation or a new version of a beloved story, you go beyond that position of it's not like the book, or it's not like the original, it's not like some new, it's not like it was before. Okay, no, it's not, and that's okay. In fact, if the MGM film teaches us anything, it's that it's not just okay, but it can potentially be an improvement, right? And some of you, I know, you're like, but I like the book better than that. That's fine. You don't have to love the MGM film, but lots of people do. and it feels like an evolution of the narrative. And I want you to be able to encounter adaptations, new versions of stories, old stories, where things get changed with a dynamic that goes beyond, it wasn't like it. It wasn't like the thing I liked. It wasn't the thing I got before. How come they changed it? No. How come they changed it? Right? It's the tone of the question. How come they changed it? And really investigating that rather than an outright rejection of some change. Just this last week, I had an experience like this. So I'm a big fan of the artwork of a Swedish painter named Simon Stalenhag, and he released an art book a few years back, 2014, I believe, called Tales from the Loop, and it imagines the mundane Swedish world of the 1980s, just everyday scenes with something a little bizarre in them, like there's a robot in the background, or there's dinosaurs in the woods or something, but it's very highly realistic approach to the painting. And then there's just something science fiction-y bizarre. And I really love the paintings. And then this role-playing game company out of Sweden created a role-playing game based on the paintings. And I love that game. Love that game. Like, one of my favorites. And Amazon just released a TV show. Yes, Kit. This is what Kit saying, did you see it? Did you know? Yeah, I did. And I was super excited about it because I loved my experience of running that role-playing game. And I'm watching the TV show and I'm going, this is nothing like the game. It's not like the game at all. It's like Simon Stalenhag's paintings, though. And I had to recalibrate my expectations and go, okay, this isn't what I wanted. This isn't what I was expecting. But what is it doing? And is it good on its own merits? Whatever this adaptation seeks to do, I have to take it on those terms, not my expectations, because that's a ridiculous rubric. AJ brought up It, right? It's Stephen King's It, which was turned into a TV miniseries not long after the publication of Stephen King's original novel. And that miniseries is a beloved classic by many people. I haven't returned to it, so I can't say how good it is, but a lot of people, have very high expectations for this new film version. And yet this new film version met a lot of people's expectations. But here's the thing, it deviated from the novel in lots of ways. And in some cases, really good ways where I think it improved on the narrative. I had a discussion with a friend recently on this whole "the book is better than the movie" thing, and they posted just a picture of somebody's it was like this face where it's like, I don't know about that, in response to someone saying that they liked the movie better than the book. And I said, but there are instances where the movie is better than the book. And I was asked to name 3. After I named 10, I felt like I might have overdone it, so I stopped. But there was still this, we're going to have a discussion about this at some time. And I can see that there's that skepticism about that, because I had claimed that I think that there are points in the Harry Potter series where the film one-ups the book in terms of narrative. And that doesn't mean that it's like, well, and therefore the books are terrible. There's this moment in one of the films where what they do isn't in the book, but I think it's narratively really, really cool. So that's one of my hopes. And so as we're discussing this, I hope we're also discussing it in a or thinking about it in a larger way, in a bigger way. And then we get the other discourse of empowerment. So we've got deviance, where magical ability is viewed as dangerous and monstrous and a natural power to be destroyed. And then, and yet you have to be reintegrated into the social order via domestication to deal with your deviance. And then in contrast, the second body of discourse, empowerment, addressing representations of witchcraft, is one which views magic as a source of individual power and agency, usually feminine. Okay. And that's right away. That's where Sabrina popped into my head, amongst other texts. A lot of text jumped into my head when I read this this chapter. All sorts of notes in the margin here. But she says, this is usually feminine. And on the facing page on 161, she said, the story of witchcraft is primarily the story of women. And she's citing Carol F. Carlson in The Devil in the Shape of a Woman. The story of witchcraft is primarily the story of women, especially in its Western incarnation. Witchcraft confronts us with ideas about women, with fears about women, with the place of women in society, and with women themselves. It confronts us, too, with systematic violence against women. And then Berger goes on to state, however, closer social historical inspection reveals that some women were much more likely to be accused than others, belying terror not of fearsome magical ability, but of women who wield too much power through the possession of property. But it's absolutely, Nisha. This is about power, really, right? And that women with power has been considered deviant. And as Berger notes, we haven't finished with this, this is still a struggle, but that we can chart some of the shifts in attitudes towards, not only towards magic and witchcraft, but towards women as well, by looking at Baum's text and then the MGM film. And so it becomes this survey. Like, on the one hand, we're doing a historical survey, and on the other, we're getting this window through these artifacts of societal change, right? Tange is letting us know, you're absolutely a good witch. And you know what? And an embodiment of those things, like that, the powerful woman, the confident woman, right? And I thought about practical magic too. I don't know if you guys have seen the movie or read the book. They're both excellent. Alicia Hoffman's Practical Magic, where there's these two women and they don't fit typical traditional domestic roles. They stand outside those. Not only can they do magic, but the way in which Hoffman imagines these women is deviant for social norms in America. And as she says on page 162, Berger says that the narrative, and this is in looking at Bewitched, so I Dream of Jeannie, Bewitched, same generation, women with power who allow themselves or choose to be domesticated and subvert their own power or sublimate their own power. This narrative of domestication shows magic being brought under control. So it's interesting to see that, when those shows were on TV, that's a period of serious societal upheaval. And so you have these shows that have to go, okay, well, we'll admit that women have some power, but don't really let them have it, right? Yeah, you're powerful, but you won't be able to keep that power. In spite of her elevated position within the magical world, the lead character of Bewitched, Samantha, chooses to marry Darren, a mortal, and vows to run their home and raise their children without the use of her magic, though this is a resolution she breaks time and again. But that produces comedy, and that, I think, is a really important distinction that she makes further down on the page, is that what happens in the way that Bewitched treats magic and witchcraft is that it shifts from a narrative of power and danger to one of this hidden power that's mostly used for comedy, and we can't understate how that changes the perception of those things. She goes on to mention so many different works in this chapter. It's fascinating to me to see her. She's getting very intertextual or intermedial here. She mentions Hermione Granger from the Harry Potter books. She mentions the television series Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Charmed, where we have powerful and positive witches. As she puts it, I think this is kind of funny, elevated to action figure status women who fight the forces of evil and look great doing it. Right? And she charts the growth or the change in tandem or parallel to the rise of, or the development, as she puts it, of Wicca in America. which coincided with the women's movement. Witches frequently appear in books, films, and television programs. They're often characterized as attractive, youthful, strong, and independent females who openly use their magical powers to fight against evil for the greater good. And this, is probably a study unto itself, because it's interesting to see how many female writers of fantasy narratives that include witches are Wiccan. Like that this is an expression of their we might say religious view at some level. I wouldn't want to overstate that, though. I feel like Berger's leaning pretty heavy on it, but I think it is indicative. I wouldn't discount that for a moment. I think that more often it's a matter of looking for the right metaphor and saying, okay, well, we want to do a story about female empowerment. We want to involve magic. Immediately jumps to the witch as metaphor, the witch as motif. But I mean, we can't discount the real world impact of people who identify with who identify as witches within Wicca, and having a positive relationship with an actual person who identifies in that way would really change the way that we feel about these things. So I wouldn't want to discount what she says here, but I don't know that's the only factor that we need to be considering as we wonder about these things. I have some contention with her in the area where she talks about that even witches, though, even once they become positive, they can still be tempted to power, and that this, as she puts it, even the witch's heroine at the bottom of page 163 is not above reproach. I don't know that that's limited to just narratives about witches. I feel like that's more just narratives of unrestrained power in general. That if you have a really, really powerful lead character, that you can generate drama by making that power a moment of temptation. Zach, a good witch makes me think of a possible conversation point with Berger. The good witch in Baum and MGM is neither deviant nor domesticated. She is instead a powerful leader. At certain points, Berger argues that in some of those instances, they're just they come and they go, but they don't act as powerfully as they could potentially. The good witch is also never tempted to the abuse of power, it seems. Yeah, that's certainly something that we don't see in Baum. Good witches are just good. She talks about this idea where the way in which these narratives change as we move from Baum to Maguire, and then the Broadway version of Wicked has this sort of retrofitting or retroactive effect on the way that we read those original texts. That the way in which the position of the Wicked Witch moves from one of deviance to one of empowerment, where there's still a concession to deviance in both of the Wicked narratives, but that it results in us rereading those earlier texts through that lens. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that because I, on the one hand, agree with her, and on the other, feel like there's a little bit of, not danger, because there's never danger really involved in any of these things, but I think a potential for flawed discourse. This is on page 189, where she says, in some cases, even the demystification of Elphaba's publicly constructed wickedness in the versions of Wicked by Maguire, Schwartz, and Holtzman, as well as in the dynamic self-identification of young women with Schwartz and Holtzman and Elphaba, enables a dramatic rereading of the Wicked witches who have preceded her. And in some cases, now I jump over to 189, even reinvest and ended up with reinvesting previous characters with an agency and depth they may not have had in their original incarnations. And then she cites Gossi, and this is from the bibliography. I'm going to just flip to it. I have not read Gossie, so I don't want to make any sort of a comment on the theory here. But she is referencing Mary S. Gossie's The Untold Story, Women in Theory in Golden Age Texts. As Gossie's theory of the untold story suggests, realizing what has been left out of preceding mainstream versions necessitates a rereading which looks toward absence as well as presence, creating a desire to know what has gone untold and why. In the context of reading or viewing either version of Wicked, for example, it becomes impossible to look at MGM's Wicked Witch of the West the same way again. And I'll admit that obviously I've got the discourse surrounding Elphaba and the movement from deviance to empowerment. I mean, my wife and I are big fans of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So, you know, for us, Willow as witch, yeah, that's a positive motif. Witches in Harry Potter, very, very positive. So when I go back to rewatch the MGM film, yeah, that's all in my head. But I don't think it's impossible for us to bracket that at some level and recognize that the witch that Margaret Hamilton embodies in that narrative is not complex in the way that Gossie might say. I mean, just given what Berger's saying about what she says here. The brilliance of Hamilton's characterization begins to assert itself even more powerfully, and the viewer finds herself speculating on the witch's motivations, perhaps even wondering whether she was really all that wicked after all. And I don't know, maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just not that kind of person. But I don't find myself watching Margaret Hamilton and going, maybe she's just misunderstood. I go, okay, this film clearly represents the witch as evil, as deviant, as the villain. And I don't have a moment where I go, I wonder what was motivating her here. I don't have those moments, not as a viewer anyway. Now, if I was a creative person like Gregory Maguire, yeah, maybe if I sat down to go, I'm going to rewrite The Wizard of Oz, then I can get into that discourse and then I can generate that. But I feel like this statement about rereading what has been left out of preceding mainstream versions necessitates a rereading which looks towards absence feels to me like I say, it's a flawed approach in my mind, because now I don't have a text to even look at anymore. I'm outside that, and then I have to, what am I relying on at that point? And this is distinct even from having a discussion of how the Wizard of Oz story has been perpetuated via its particular textual iterations. This just becomes a moment of speculation when you say, well, they didn't do this in this story. Let's talk about why. I feel like that's a slippery slope down to, just sitting around and going, wouldn't it be cool if the Wicked Witch, the reason that she did this is because when she was a kid. Not really textual speculation at that point. Could be super fun, could be a great drinking game. But I don't think it's literary study at that point. And she sort of makes a concession towards this at the end of this paragraph. While earlier versions of the Wizard of Oz narrative are not fundamentally changed in the slightest by this revisionist approach and the elevation of Elphaba to heroine position, Maguire's novel and Schwartz and Holtzman's musical dynamically create a new position of reading and identification, challenging preceding discourses of magic and witchcraft throughout the Wizard of Oz tale. And that I'd agree with. That the two versions of Wicked can challenge the discourse of magic and witchcraft as deviant in those earlier texts, but that that we go in and we sort of work with the absences. I find that troubling. And then at the bottom of that page, she says something that was one of these exploding dice moments for me. As this trend continues to develop, it seems certain that Oz fans will continue to see further complication of once familiar characters, leading to considerations of the complexity that underlies easy distinctions between good and evil, wonderful and wicked, dichotomies that are proving less and less tenable in a postmodern world. And there she's reaching back to earlier chapters, and we can see that like I said earlier, that she loves to work with these dichotomies, and sort of craft a spectrum from Baum to Wicked. And now I'm wishing that I had Baum over here or Baum over here and then Wicked over here so that I could go and it would actually be representative. But I didn't do that with my books, and I'm not getting up. What I love about this, though, is that it acts as that moment of from this course beyond. As this trend continues to develop, this trend of change, this trend of transformation, of a witch who was the villain and not even, let me rephrase, the witch who was a villain in Baum's The Wonderful Wizard of Oz becomes the heroine of Wicked in the space of roughly a century. As this trend continues to develop, it seems certain that Oz fans will continue to see further complication of once familiar characters. And I got thinking about once familiar characters, the complication of once familiar characters. And this is why I love adaptation studies. It's why I enjoy discourse like the one that Berger is involved in here. It's why I like working with Hutchin in my classes, because for me, I enjoy seeing the differences in character representations over time and discussing how those different representations embody different ideas or attempt to achieve different outcomes. Maybe it's not something as deep as embodying an idea. Maybe it's just this particular version of whomever is comedy versus serious. I mean, Batman in the 1960s, comedy. Batman in the aughts, Christopher Nolan, that's serious, right? It's like somebody made Michael Mann movies with Batman in them. They were like crime dramas or cop dramas with Batman in them. Those are very different approaches. And to say that one is better than the other seems like a very limited discourse. So this complication of once familiar characters can lead to, I think, really great discussion if we can move beyond. And I know many of you feel like, you already have. Some of you had when you walked in the door to this course. For some of you, maybe it's still been a journey. But I mean, like I said earlier in this lecture, I'm having this discussion on social media just a week ago. Right? There's a tacit assumption the book is always better than the movie, or some earlier version is better than this later version. And I would rather have the kind of discussion that Berger is having in this chapter on magic and witchcraft, where she identifies these dichotomies and says, hey, it looks like we're moving from this to this. And if we look at these different iterations of the character of the Wicked Witch of the West, we can see why this transformation is occurring. We can align it with certain moments in society. I loved when she notes on page 186, she's got that block quotation from Sharon Cruz and Sandra Prettyman, where they say, in an effort to sanction Elphaba, Morrible labels her a witch. In this act, Elphaba ceases to be, replaced by a label linked to all that is evil and wicked. Yet, as we all know, witches are creative, magical people who have power to change the world around them. And Berger says, Cruz and Prettyman's phrase, as we all know, gestures towards the shifting assumptions surrounding discourses of magic and witchcraft in American culture, because I don't think that could have been said back in the late 1930s, that we, that you could have said, yet as we all know, and had people agree with you. And so Berger looks at that and says, just the fact that these people would assume that they can write that and say, as we all know, is a textual artifact that indicates this shift. But I can think of a number of contentious shifts in adaptation that I look at, and I think those are indicative of societal changes too, or they're indicative of how that filmmaker or that game maker or that novelist or whomever wanted to do something new. They wanted to change the narrative from what it had been to what it could be next. I think about Marvel Comics making the decision to allow Thor to be female for several years of that comics run. And the lashback that came from the fan community going, Thor can't be a woman. You know, in the Greek, or sorry, in the Norse myth, it wasn't a woman. And it's like, A, Marvel Comics version is not Norse myth. B, yes, Thor can be a woman. It's happened now. It's been done. Now, going back to Hutchin, the success of that adaptation is going to bear out whether or not that idea was a successful one to adapt, a successful way to adapt that. I mentioned earlier in the semester being at a barbecue where someone suggested a black James Bond, and the pushback from a number of James Bond fans who were there saying, you can't make James Bond black. Well, if they did, it would be done. It's the same thing with characters like Doctor Who. Doctor Who can't be a woman. Well, now she is. I think about the most recent Star Wars movies, and that fans were upset because they're like, well, it seems like all they're doing is remaking the original series. And yeah, that's kind of what they were doing with the last couple of Star Wars movies. But the anger over Luke as Luke Skywalker, this optimistic hero, this virtuous, knight in shining armor kind of guy who is reimagined as bitter and cynical and just fed up and tired. You can't do it's done. It's been done. Now, I want to talk about what that does to the narrative. I want to talk about what they're potentially trying to achieve in those moments. And if we can accept, here's the thing, if we can accept's the wrong word. If we can embrace, because that's really what's happened with Elphaba, is that there is an embracing of an iconic villain, the Wicked Witch of the West. If you can take a villain as iconic as Margaret Hamilton's Wicked Witch of the West and make her a beloved heroine, then why can't any of these other things work? Maybe they're poorly done. And if the technical side of things is underwhelming, then we have that to say. It's just not a very good film. Like, occasionally an adaptation isn't very good because it's a crummy film. Technically, they did something that was rubbish from a filmmaking perspective. But if the idea takes root and that version begins to, as with the MGM film, eclipse the original, there might be something in there that's striking the zeitgeist. That is a narrative improvement. And no matter how much we love that original text, that's how stories evolve and change over time. I mentioned Journey to the West a number of times this semester. That's one instance of where the narrative keeps getting written and rewritten and changing the nature of the characters, and that there's nothing in story at some level that is so sacred that it cannot find itself subject to those sorts of changes. Obviously, in an age of copyright and intellectual property, we have those things to deal with. But I think that there will always be a press or an impulse, as Hutchin puts it, for us to retell stories. This is nothing new. What we do in this day and age with film and book has been done since the beginning of literature, within whatever the medium was of the time, to retell familiar stories, to imagine familiar characters, and to tell new stories, to reimagine those things. So that's what I hope you take with you out of this course. I mean, I hope you take a love of The Wizard of Oz with you as well. I know that some of you discovered the wonderful music of The Wiz live, and I think that's great. Some of you discovered that you think that the original Baum version is actually very charming, and you're a big fan of Denslow's art. Some of you have discovered that you love a Broadway musical. My hope is that, though, beyond that love of Oz, that you have gained a new set of terms, approaches, theories to having conversations about when something, be it a book or a movie or a game, whatever it might be, gets changed into another form or gets translated into a new narrative. So that's me. I'm done. this course is over. And I hope that those of you who have finals, I'm going to say good luck to you. I hope that you feel like this course has been worth your time. And don't forget, because I think it's the last day to do it, to rate the course, to go and give feedback, because that'll help me to know ways in which I might be able to improve it, or things that worked really well that I'll want to hang on to. Thanks everyone for an lively, at certain points, illuminating and enjoyable semester. It's been, a real challenge here at the end, but I'm thankful for all of you for showing up for the YouTube videos and for continuing to work as hard as you have all semester. Take care. Have a great spring / summer / whatever. Those of you who are graduating, woo! And I'll hang around for a couple minutes if you have questions about anything. I can imagine what you'd have a question about. We don't have a final in this course. You're welcome, Cairo. You're welcome, Catherine. Nisha, that's exactly what I hope for. Being open to adaptations. It doesn't mean we have to like whatever they are, but that we leave ourselves open to it. Because that's how I felt watching that Tales from the Loop show. I was like, oh, this isn't what I wanted. So then I had to go like, well, you can either enjoy this or you can just get a big hate going on. Oh wow, Tange is working on a concept album. No, I don't know if it's a concept album, but themes, ideas, symbols of the Wizard of Oz have permeated the album I'm working on with my band. Yeah, that happens. Hey, I remember when I was doing, especially undergraduate work, and stuff that I would learn in classes always ended up in my lyrics, which is how I ended up quoting Milton in a song at one point. You're welcome, AJ. Good luck. You're welcome, Nisha. Yeah. Oh, that's nice. Thank you. Well, so I'm gonna keep doing YouTube videos for the spring and summer. I'm not gonna do like 3 a day or something like that on like I have been for some of the course days. But my goal is to at least do something weekly related to literature. So watch for those if you like them. I mean, you guys know where I am now. Good feedback, Kit. Thanks. Yeah, I think race and gender might be the better approach in the future. And if you haven't, I'll reiterate, here's something you might want to pick up if you have the wherewithal to do so. The new omnibus collections of the Marvel Oz books. So you get the Wizard of Oz. I think Scotty Young's artwork is some of the best that's ever been done of the Wizard of Oz. I just can't get enough of it. There's the Dorothy meeting the Scarecrow. And you not only get the wonderful Wizard of Oz, but you also get Marvelous Land of Oz in this one. So two books per volume, and that's what's being re-released right now. I don't know what the shipping will be like under the certain circumstances because I don't know who's distributing this. But check it out. And if you're going to check it out, I'm going to give a shout out. Now, maybe I shouldn't because it's this is on McEwen's time. Okay, class is over. Variant Edition, which is a comic shop in Edmonton, delivers comics, and they had that's where I got this. So maybe they have some other copies. So if you're interested in getting that, you can talk to Brandon or Danica over at Variant Edition and say, hey, do you have the Oz Omnibuy? Zach, you're welcome. Good luck with the new publishing thing this summer. I hope that goes well despite all of the craziness of what's going on. Thanks, Tange. That's very nice. Namaste. Yeah, Nisha, I'm excited for the film class. Which one? The intro? No, you took intro already. Horror. Ha! It's going to be so great. Yeah, Cairo's giving a shout out for Variant as well. So see, it's Cairo's fault I did that. He brought it up. All right. I'm going to head out of here. You guys know where I am via email. I've got another class to teach today, so I'm going to take a quick water break. Take care, everyone.